Okay, this is part three, but the second video walking through how to scale an ecom business and build your brand at the same time. So now that we've gone through understanding the customers, the value of a customer, understanding order metrics, sales metrics, and understanding the LTV model, now it's time to use that to look at our media. So a couple things here. One, it's important to take action, obviously, right? That's what we all care about. So I'm going to touch on attribution a little bit, but you always got to know, we all know this, that the ad platforms are taking as much credit as possible. But at the very least, you can use your target CPAs from the LTV model, and you bet depending on how strict your goals are, your media platform reporting and your media platform CPAs need to be at or below your target CPA. And we'll talk about some of these nuances that come with what Facebook reports versus what, let's say, GA reports. A few more caveats. There are obviously a ton of these things. One, even though we've acquired a customer, you got to figure out and make sure we understand, is it a new or repeat customer? So, for example, I have a client where about 30% of the Facebook orders are coming from repeat buyers. So we may think we've got a $100 CPA, so we think we've gotten an awesome CPA and we're getting all of these customers. The reality is 30% of them are repeat. So the easiest way I have to deal with this is, let's say we had a $100 CPA target. If 30% are repeat, then just count that number by 30%. So your target's 70, not 100. I'd rather not adjust actuals. I'd just rather adjust the target CPA. Next, AdWords, typically has a 30-day window. So just be mindful that if you pull reporting on a Monday for the prior week, that's going to be different than when you pull those numbers, a week or two later, at least presumably will. And then third, for Facebook, and this is really kind of a global thing, it's important to understand incrementality and particularly view-throughs. I pretty much use 0% for view-through orders. But I will say, if you do a brand or a conversion lift study, which I've now done a couple times with clients via Facebook, you may find that they're actually something you feel confident in on doing a holdout group versus versus those senior ads, and then understanding what the implication is of that. And there are, frankly, even like multiple layers of this kind of lift, these lift studies and tests you can do. Also, just be very mindful, again, kind of obvious, but whether you're looking at a 1-day versus 7-day and 28-day attribution. I think Facebook defaults to 28-day click, 1-day view. What I end up generally looking at with most folks is a 1-day and a 7-day. But I'm going to show in a second, but even if you're using, let's say, 7-day, if you understand what the delta is between day 1 and day 7, you can use that so you can take action on day 1 and not wait for day 7, but then just monitor the trends over time. So Facebook and GA report differently. We know that, but there's some good value to be done to compare. So what I've got down here, again, made up numbers. I've kind of switched up numbers throughout the deck, but none of these are real. So we'll just use these to describe what's going on. We looked at quarterly performance, sales, Facebook spend. These are the 1-day, 7-day, and 28-day. We looked at what's the 7-day versus 1-day. So how much more do we get from essentially in days 2 through 7? And what, on average, it's actually a relatively tight band. About 50% more orders are coming in days 2 through 7. So one of the things right off the bat we can do is say, hey, if we're going for a 7-day, that's kind of our metric. And the reality is there's art and science on this. So I'm going to kind of try to stay away from like what's right. But other than to say that whatever we get on day 1, we would expect to get 50% more orders by day 7. And so again, like rarely we want to wait more than a day or 3 days. Everyone's impatient, but also you oftentimes don't have to wait. But this can be a tool to use to help, just simply, on average, we should be seeing 50% more orders. Next, if I pull from GA and if I look at the source medium, for example, no doubt you don't have to even do much to say, well, the source medium numbers from GA are totally different than 1-day. And if we look, though, at what is 1-day versus GA and what is 7-day versus GA, you can see on average it's about, let's say, 2 to 3 times. My experience actually has been that that's not unusual, especially for D2C physical products, e-com businesses. And so obviously the delta, though, is made up from a few different places. It's made up from cross-device because Facebook tracks it. GA does not. It can be orders coming in. Someone clicks on an ad, doesn't order, then goes back direct or via email or via organic search, or they opt in and they get hit back up with something. So brand search was the other one. I knew there was one more. So their GA is going to give credit to the last click. Facebook doesn't care because that pixel, all it cares about is Facebook. So understanding the differences and diagnosing them, again, we can talk about some ways to do that. But, this number doesn't freak me out. And certainly the goal is not that Facebook and GA match. They're never going to match. I don't spend any time trying to get them there. But, for example, if this was trending around these numbers and then this number was all of a sudden 350%, that's probably an indicator that something's going on. And I'm going to show an example in a second that this is quarterly numbers. You don't want to wait for the quarter to be over. There are ways to track this much more real time. And so part of it is looking for deltas and changes and differences. I mean, frankly, that's one of the reasons we do reporting, is to actually just monitor to make sure things haven't broken, things haven't changed, because as we all know, stuff just happens intentionally and otherwise, and sometimes it's our platforms, sometimes it's a third party's one. I would say that, as much as I said the 2 to 3x, I feel reasonable. I've seen enough. If I saw 7x, probably getting concerned. Because one, again, kind of obvious, you want to make sure that what Facebook's taking credit for is actually less than the total. I've seen some places where you got pixels double firing or there's just a totally incorrect setup. And so, kind of obvious, but, that's one sanity check. But you also want to understand, where else are those orders going through, and just to make sure you're not double counting, in particular for 2 paid media channels. So again, there are my experience with GA's tools from the conversion pathing tool. It's okay. The reality of attribution and some of this stuff is we're triangulating and trying to get a reasonable level of comfort, and then looking for patterns over time. One other thing I like to look at, though, is sometimes it's, well, what is Facebook? And obviously it could be Facebook and Instagram. What is it driving for the business? And so if we look at GA reporting, GA would say that Facebook's driving on average 9%. You can look at the 1 day and the 7 day, just didn't include the average here, but let's say it's 35%. So kind of best case, at least on a click basis, Facebook's driving 35% of this company's business. And so, some people may say that's high, some people may say it's low. It depends again on, where things were in prior periods. In general, looks like it's going down, which, again, just by itself, is that necessarily good or bad? I don't really know right off the bat, but it's at least, there are some things then that require, a little bit further analysis and investigation. This is more of a weekly reporting kind of tool and view that I like to use. And so what this side is, so this is last week and the prior week. And what really this left side is all coming from the media platforms. So affiliate, depending on whatever platform has offers, reversion, whatever, paid search, paid social. Obviously, email isn't really a channel. So, this one I usually have a paid channel. Anything really that's got a cost explicitly associated with it. And then this side's GA. So similar type of thing we're doing, but this is looking at it on a weekly basis to see what's going on, what are some of the trends. And then so we can kind of look at this, but really the better way to look at this is to pick a specific channel and look at trending. So this is 4, 8, 9 weeks. And then we can say, here's media source, here's GA. We can put some conditional formatting in place to look for the highs and the lows, good and bad. And then, as this is basically the weekly view of what we had looked at on a quarterly basis to say, this thing has been trending around 30%. There's a reasonable amount of media, and then all of a sudden something happens. So either Facebook started reporting screwy or something happened with GA. And so that's an example, which I've seen plenty of times where, something happens, the numbers look completely out of whack. That doesn't make sense. And so something would look into it. You might ask, like, what's going on here? Different businesses flatten out at different levels of scale. And so for this one, at 50, 67K of spend, that's where the numbers were. As spend started increasing, sometimes also it takes like a week or two for some of these metrics to dial in. As much as we try to be as solid as possible on day 1, day 7, and try to mitigate halo effect, sometimes there is that. And so there is a lag that can be kicked in. I also like to look at percent of spend and percent of conversion. So let's say paid social has been decreasing as a percent of spend. Obviously, I can do this exact same thing with all the other channels and look to see what's been going on there to see where that difference is. In this case, spend is actually going up. So most likely some other channels are increasing at a faster rate. And then also what percent of conversions are coming from Facebook. And again, you can look at this both on the GA basis. And if you're going to do this has got to be looked at on a GA basis, because obviously the sum of all your media platforms, if you will, is going to be over the total. And so this is really more relevant for GA reporting than it is media platform reporting. Graphs are good is really all I'd say here. Whether or not you consider yourself a numbers person, sometimes graphs can help identify trends that you may not have seen as visibly on a table. So whether it's outliers, trends, things like that, you got to obviously always be mindful of scale as you go through this. But I really encourage you to use graphs as well, not just because they kind of look sexy or whatever, but they actually can be helpful to help identify things that are going on. Kind of a final note, anytime you want to do this kind of work, the syntax you use is really important. So this is not an uncommon thing I've seen where people have set up UTM parameters, which is awesome, but then they're inconsistent about how they do it. So case makes a difference, space makes a difference, all this kind of stuff. This is just 3 examples of these are UTMs attached to Facebook paid social. But the problem is when you're pulling out of GA, you're going to have to go and find each of them if you've done them differently. And so consistency over time is a really important thing because it just makes life a lot easier. And there are some places where you've got to be very methodical about it. Otherwise, on the back end, you're going to be doing a bunch of work. You may miscount, those kinds of things. Generally speaking, what I would say is don't go back, especially with Facebook, don't go back and change your existing campaigns because it very likely will put your ad back into a learning phase. But it is one of these things where over time you start making more and more, you're much more consistent. Generally speaking, some of your older ads are going to start to retire and expire. And so, you may have some of these things that are legacy if you've been doing them, but, percentage wise, hopefully they start going down and then they go away entirely. Let's talk briefly about optimization. And really, I'm not going to spend as much time in this video other than to say you have, or you should have the deck, and you can kind of click through. But I basically have posts on both revenue and on cost optimization. The short version is, breaking things down. So looking at traffic and media, conversion, you can obviously read these. And in this blog post, I go through and I detail the process I use and have used time and time again. There are definitely no absolutes, but there are some places to start and get some ideas. And this blog post in particular has gotten some great feedback. The other side, which you'll see when you click through, most people don't like to focus as much on cost optimization. It's not as sexy. Oftentimes, it's hey, I can as long as I grow sales, I can fix sales fixes problems. Yes, up until a point. Some of these things are obviously we're in that LTV model, so merchant processing, shipping, fulfillment, product cost, customer service. These 2 commissions to affiliates and sales reps, those are more attached to revenue than they are costs. Like these are more cost centers, if you will. To be honest, I just hadn't included them in the original revenue deck, so included them here. And then things like technology. So I put this here more about making sure you're working with vendors, especially as you're scaling. It's very common to have tiered pricing, right? But, across the board, every year or so, you should be talking with vendors, especially when you're seeing growth in your business to see what kind of economies. And by the way, sometimes it's actually going to repitch the business or have other people do to pitch the business. Your 3PL may have been great at the beginning and maybe you've outgrown them, or maybe they only have one location and you need multiple, which over time you likely do. So each of these areas, certainly, as I said, not sexy, but can certainly impact the bottom line, your LTV and your unit economics model, and certainly your P&L and your cash. And even at the very least, sometimes just getting terms difference. So being net 30 versus net 60, some of those things, we're always constantly, it feels like we're always managing to cash. You may not get as much better improvements on rate, but maybe the improvement happens in terms. So definitely something for people on the operational side of the business to be working on. So let me pause here. The next video will be on the subscription businesses, but it seems like a very good place to stop.